A couple of days after the killing of Renee Good, I spoke with a UU minister of African descent who was in my interim ministry training last year. She asked how I was doing, and I spoke to her about my sorrow and anger I was experiencing over Good's killing by an ICE agent. She paused, then spoke forcefully in that moment. Forcefully that in this moment, white Americans are getting a little taste of what it's like to be terrorized as a person of color in this country, a terror practiced from the earliest times till the present day. It was a humbling moment for me to hear her words and know the abusive actions of the ICE and Border Patrol agents against white protesters are a long-standing behavior of government abuse. The only difference right now is the focus is on predominantly white anti-ICE protesters. It reminded me of the terrible abuse by police in the South against civil rights protesters, white and black, in the 1960s. The reign of terror of Jim Crow after the abandonment of Reconstruction and the removal of federal troops to enforce it following the election of 1877, the lynchings, the chain gangs, so many horrible acts of oppression against the formerly enslaved. The broadcast of the violence against demonstrators across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma on television started changing that tide against it. And today we can only hope that the video of the shooting of Renee Good might spark that same kind of energy. The oldest organizing method to bring people together in a coalition in the political playbook is to identify, demonize, and dehumanize an enemy. President Trump is skilled in identifying sources of anxiety, anger, and resentment, and building a common enemy out of them, then united people to go after them. Today's enemy Trump has created are those who are defending the rights of immigrants, who he would like to label woke terrorists and enemies of the state rather than courageous defenders of immigrants' civil rights. The remembrance of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this weekend puts all this in stark relief. We are at a time now that is reminiscent of the period before the Civil War, of strong divisions between slave and free states. Today, we experience strong divisions between red and blue states and communities. The division between slave and free states predated the Revolutionary War and the drafting of our Constitution. What kept those 13 colonies together was realizing they needed each other to create a new nation. They compromised to stay together. They were separate enough that many in the North were not aware of the harm slaves were enduring and thus could look the other way until they couldn't anymore. And it was a group of abolitionists in the North that wouldn't let them do it. I'd like to tell you a little bit about a Unitarian minister who was recruited for the cause of abolition named Reverend Samuel Joseph May. I'd like to focus on him today as an example of how people are inspired to move into action against injustice and oppression. Hearing about all the bad things happening in the current administration isn't enough to activate people. In fact, it can have the opposite effect, making people feel resigned and hopeless. that wasn't May's response. I'd like to dive a little deeper into the character traits he had that we might wish to develop that can help move us into action, to make a difference and feel that satisfaction of being part of energizing participation and help build a better society. There's an excellent short biography of May on the great Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography website. I'd like to share a little bit of it with you now to give you some of his background. This article begins with these words to describe him. Describe him as one of the greatest social and educational reformers of the 19th century. He advocated and organized on behalf of freedom and civil rights for blacks, emancipation and voters' rights for women, and just rights for workers. Because he was many decades ahead of the mainstream acceptance of the policies he fought for, he was often at odds with his ministerial colleagues, church members, and the public at large. May had a fortunate birth into upper-class Boston aristocracy, connected with many of the leading families in colonial Massachusetts. Frail as a child, Samuel might have been marked for ministry by tragedy when he was 6, by the death of his beloved older brother in an accident. It was instilled in him a great seriousness of purpose and belief in human immortality. May's father was an active leader in King's Chapel, the landmark Boston Anglican church that voted to join the American Unitarian Association in its inception in 1825, after the congregation voted to remove Trinitarian references from their liturgy. The family were personal friends with the light of Unitarianism in New England, William Ellery Channing. Samuel had permission as a child to go visit Channing's study all by himself. May attended Harvard, graduating in 1817 and entering divinity school. He was in the Unitarian vanguard of ministers, breaking with orthodoxy, questioning the authority of the Bible and the Immaculate Conception of Jesus. After getting his approbation to serve as a minister in 1820, he preached for Reverend Channing and in New York City, getting his feet on the ground. It was during that time, on a trip south to Richmond with his sister, that he had a life-changing experience. In his words, somewhere between Baltimore and Washington, he saw by the roadside 20 or 30 colored men handcuffed and fastened with a long, heavy chain that was attached to a wagon. What have these men been doing? What crime have they committed? Exclaimed his sister. Oh, said a fellow passenger, they are only a gang of slaves that some planter or trader has purchased, and he is taking them south. Is this the way slaves are treated in our country? She replied. I joined with her in expressing our shame and horror. You must be from the north, said a gentleman on the back seat. From New England, perhaps, not used to seeing slaves. Yes, sir, I replied. We are from Massachusetts, and I never so fully realized before how great a privilege it is to live where human beings cannot be treated in this manner. He courteously dropped the subject, and so did I. But it dropped into the bottom of my heart and made me an abolitionist. He accepted a call to a Brooklyn congregation, the only liberal Unitarian congregation at that time in Connecticut, much smaller after all of the Orthodox members left. He married Lucretia Flagg Coffin in 1825. They had a devoted marriage with each other, had 4 children that made it to adulthood. In 1826, May guided the formation of the Windham County Peace Society. Influenced by Noah Worcester, he became a pacifist in 1819. This prevented him from serving as a military chaplain and also officiating at a hanging. Witnessing the poor conditions of schools in Connecticut, he organized the first statewide convention of school reform, inspired by the young Bronson Alcott. He invited Alcott for an extended conversation that stimulated his enthusiasm for school reform. Alcott eventually married May's sister, Abigail. Alcott admiringly dubbed May the Lord's chore boy, for his unrelenting pursuit of human welfare. To get to the theme of abolition, it is noteworthy that though May had that coach ride and witnessed the evils of slavery directly, he didn't enlist in the cause right away. There were about 8 years of other interests, like peace, very involved with temperance, and education. It wasn't until he heard Garrison, that lecture you heard in the reading, that he was fired up. I'd like to read to you a portion of this remembrance from the reading that I edited out to make it a little shorter, to help you understand what changed him into an activist. Mr. Sewell and Mr. Alcott went up with me, and we introduced each other, and I said to him, "Mr. Garrison, I am not sure that I endorse all you have said this evening. Much of it requires careful consideration, but I am prepared to embrace you. I am sure you are called to a great work, and I mean to help you." Mr. Sewell cordially assured him of his readiness to cooperate with him. Mr. Alcott invited him to his home. We went, and he sat with us until 12 at night. We listened to his discourse, in which he showed plainly that immediate unconditional emancipation without expatriation was the right of every slave and could not be withheld by his master for an hour without sin. That night, my soul was baptized in his spirit, and ever since I have been a disciple and fellow laborer with William Lloyd Garrison. May didn't follow the crowd to join this cause. Other Unitarian ministers didn't share his passion and wouldn't exchange pulpits with him because they didn't want him to talk about abolition in front of them. His father worried he'd become a fanatic, but May was undaunted. He worked closely with Garrison for 2 difficult years to form the New England Anti-Slavery Society. He had a deep insight into why others were resistant to abolition. He preached, "It is our own prejudice against the color of these poor people that makes us consent to the tremendous wrongs they are suffering." There's so much more to say about May's inspirational life. For our purposes today, what I'm after is how May moved to action. A big part of the persuasion of Garrison's words moved him. But more than that, what I want to focus on is going to Garrison to Alcott's house and making those conversations, talking late into the night. That human connection sealed his commitment, his promise to the cause of liberation. He moved to Syracuse, New York in 1845 and continued his ministry there for the rest of his life. He didn't settle just on abolition. He was moved to action to respond to the Onondaga Nation and their impoverished state. He was a strong ally of women's rights with upstate New York with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and even the Canal Boys. And probably you've never heard of the Canal Boys. These were the youth who worked on the Erie Canal and remained afterwards shiftless and homeless under the bridges in Syracuse. They attracted his attention. Soon after his arrival, he organized the local clergy to address their needs. In all of his organizing and action, he had strong personal connections that supported his work. That is the message I'm hoping that you can take home from Samuel May's life this morning. It isn't enough to just read about the problems of the world. There are always an overwhelming number of them. In our modern age, we can read about so much suffering every day all around the globe. One can become numb before the flood of misery. May took the next step to make those personal connections relevant to the issue. If he heard a lecture, read a book, or witnessed a problem, he would want to make personal contact. He met with Bronston Alcott on education. He immediately contacted William Lloyd Garrison. Reading his autobiography, I saw other such contacts. Even when he disagreed with someone theologically, like Transcendentalist Theodore Parker, he wanted to meet him face to face, be in conversation, and he developed a lifetime relationship with Parker. Living in New York City, we are so fortunate to be close enough together to facilitate such connections. Just 2 blocks from Fourth Universalist at the JCC on Amsterdam. For the last 3 years, community leaders have been meeting once a month to discuss immigration issues and ways to resolve the problems that come up with healthcare, schools, unemployment, government, religious organizations. In this network of networks, all kinds of relationships can happen, and so much good work is being done. This congregation is a mini hub of activity. So many of us are connected into bigger networks, trying to cope, some of us, with the negative effects of the current administration in Washington, D.C. When we meet together and share what we know, change can happen. And this isn't just the work that gets done. Being in relationship with people who want to make a positive difference in our community is all by itself deeply satisfying and makes the work even more meaningful. So this weekend, when we honor the legacy of Dr. King, we also honor the legacy of the coalitional work that he did, bringing people together to make a positive change. We honor his legacy by following his example. So be it.